Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to unravel an ancient archaeological discovery that, well, it honestly unfolds exactly like a modern true crime thriller. We're talking about piecing together a millennial-old puzzle using some incredibly perfectly preserved clues. So, grab your detective hats, because this one is wild. I want you to imagine being a detective, called out to a grisly scene. You get there, and the fingerprints, the lines on the victim's hands, they are so crystal clear that your initial analysis suggests this person has been dead for, maybe 4 days? It looked for all the world like a standard modern-day homicide, but the truth was actually far more sinister.
Part 1. The Bog Mystery.
Picture this. It's June 2003 in a super remote area of central Ireland. Workers are out there clearing a muddy peat bog when they uncover a genuinely horrific sight: 2 human hands sticking right out of the earth. Obviously shocked, they immediately call the police, completely convinced they've just stumbled onto a recent brutal murder. So an experienced pathologist, Richard Shepherd, comes in to examine these bizarre remains. And it's a grim picture. They've got 2 arms, a chest, and a stomach, but the head and the entire lower half? Just gone, intentionally severed and missing completely. But the weirdest part? The skin had somehow transformed into this tough black leather. The lab absolutely had to figure out exactly when this person actually died. Which brings us to part 2, a 2,400-year-old murder. The lab takes some samples for radiocarbon dating, fully expecting to confirm a recent death, right? Well, the results absolutely stunned everyone. This wasn't a crime from 4 days ago. It wasn't even from 4 decades ago. Radiocarbon dating proved this was a 2,400-year-old murder victim straight out of the Iron Age. I mean, how on earth does a body survive that long looking this intact? You know, when we think of preserved bodies, we usually picture Egyptian mummies, which were intentionally dried out and chemically treated. But bog bodies? Totally different ballgame. The highly acidic mix of water and rotting plants in these bogs literally stops decomposition in its tracks. It naturally tans human skin exactly like leather, freezing a 2,400-year-old crime scene perfectly in time. Part 3. What do the clues say? Oh, and because he was found near Krogan Hill, experts dubbed our victim Old Krogan Man. Now, experts calculated his physical stature just from his massive arms. To put this in perspective, the average ancient Irish man stood about 5.5 feet tall. But Old Krogan Man, he was an absolute giant, standing at a massive, imposing 6 foot 6 inches. So you have to wonder, right? Was he a fierce warrior, a heavy laborer? Well, actually, the other clues tell a completely different story. Despite his enormous size, he definitely wasn't a laborer. His clean, manicured fingernails were an absolute luxury back then, something only the highest tier of society could possibly maintain. Plus, he had 0 manual labor calluses, and he wore this incredibly sophisticated braided leather armlet. That is an accessory strictly linked to high-status religious leaders. But clearly, all that wealth and status didn't protect him. The forensics are just brutal. They found holes pierced directly through his elbows, which actually still contained fragments of twisted hazel twigs used to tie him up. And strike marks near his neck proved he was forced to his knees and brutally decapitated from behind. This wasn't just a murder, this was a highly deliberate execution. Yet, out of all this, the single most baffling forensic clue was a really bizarre mutilation. Krogan Man's left nipple had been cleanly sliced off right before he died. I mean, what is that? Was it a serial killer's signature mark, or maybe some dark ancient ritual? Investigators desperately needed a missing link to figure this out. Enter Part 4, Second Body and a Pattern. Because just a short distance away, another horrifying discovery was pulled from the mud. A second body, dubbed Cloney Cavan Man. And let me tell you, this blew the whole investigation wide open. We were no longer looking at an isolated ancient murder. We were suddenly looking at a serial pattern. And the pattern connecting these 2 victims is chilling. Both men were preserved in nearby bogs. Both were killed during the exact same Iron Age era. Both were brutally severed in half. And remarkably, you guessed it, both men were missing their left nipples. This identical, super specific mutilation proved that a single, specific societal rule was responsible here. So, the mystery of the sliced nipples was actually finally solved by the 5th century writings of St. Patrick.
Apparently, in ancient Irish kingdoms, a king's nipples literally represented his royal power. Bizarre, right? But to definitively dethrone a king, the public would physically cut them off. Meaning, our victims weren't just the ancient elite, they were fallen kings.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Part 5, Weather, Famine, and Gruesome Sacrifice. To figure out the motive behind dethroning two kings at the same time, experts looked straight at the mud. A peat bog basically acts like a layered time machine. It takes roughly 12 years to form just 1 centimeter of bog, so to find the exact environmental conditions from 2,400 years ago, scientists simply had to dig exactly 2 meters straight down.
And at that exact 2-meter depth, scientists extracted microscopic pollen to literally reconstruct the ancient climate. What they found was absolutely devastating. The region had been hit with extreme cold and intense dampness. Crops failed completely across the board, leaving nothing but wild weeds and grasses. Basically, the entire kingdom was starving.
And we can actually see how this famine impacted our victim's final days. For the month leading up to his death, stomach contents show Krogan man enjoyed a king's diet, heavy in rich meat. But his very final meal? Just plain wheat bread and buttermilk. Basic peasant food. He was literally stripped of his royal status right before his execution.
So, bringing it all together, the final days of these kings were incredibly tragic. Back then, kings were seen as divine figures, directly responsible for the land's prosperity. When the famine struck, the starving people blamed their leaders. They violently dethroned them, fed them peasant rations, and brutally sacrificed them to the bog in a desperate plea to the gods for better weather. It is such a fascinating, if somewhat grim, look into human psychology. I want to leave you with a final thought on this explainer. When disaster strikes and pure desperation sets in, humanity almost always looks for a scapegoat. Sure, we might not sacrifice our leaders to a muddy bog anymore to change the weather, but it really begs the question, how much has human nature actually changed?